Tonight. So Dave Adey is an alumni from the sculpture department here at Cranbrook Academy of Art. He finished his MFA in 2002. He's had solo shows at Luis de Jesus Gallery in Los Angeles, the La Jolla Athenaeum, Seminole Projects in San Diego, and Spacecraft Gallery in San Diego. He's also been included in a number of group shows, including the 2010 California Biennial at the Orange County Museum of Art, also Here Not There at the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, and Aqua Art Miami. In 2010, he was included in Southern California's top 10 exhibitions of the year, awarded by the Huffington Post. And the same show that won him that was also awarded Exhibition of the Year by San Diego Fine Arts Society. Also in 2010, Dave won a San Diego Art Prize for Emerging Artist through San Diego Visual Arts Network. So Dave is currently associate professor at the art department at my alma mater, Point Loma Nazarene University in San Diego, California. Dave has been a huge asset to our department over the last couple of days, meeting with all of our students. It's been wonderful, and he's been a big asset to me personally over the years as a friend and mentor. So thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it, and please welcome with me Dave Adey.
Thanks, Lindsay. It's great to be back. It's great to be invited back, actually. So thank you, Heather, and the sculpture department for your hospitality, Jamie for your concierge service over the last couple days. Really nice. The hospitality has been fantastic. It's a lot of fun. But being back, I graduated 10 years ago, so being back here is a really great reminder to me, kind of walking around and the place is still, for the most part, the same, about how many of my ideas, or the ideas that I've been working on through the last 10 years, in almost every instance, found their start here in the sculpture studios. And also spending time with Heather this morning, realizing yet again what an influence she has been on me and her work ethic and her work and all these things. So it's really nice to be back, and it's been really inspiring meeting with all the students today. The work's been fantastic. The conversations have been great. So I'm having a great time, partly because I'm on sabbatical right now, which is fantastic. I recommend it highly. And so, but this place kind of finds its way into so many aspects you will find of your life as you continue. And 10 years out, I continue to reflect and realize the influence that it continues to have on me. It was 2 of the best years of my life. And so one of my latest sabbatical obsessions, aside from making art like crazy, which is the best part, is the banjo. And so even the banjo has some Cranbrook influence, as you can see. And so this is a shot of my studio and my wife. I built a porch a year ago, which clearly you have to have a porch before you can buy a banjo. So I've been playing the banjo a lot and making art a lot. And I actually had kind of harkens back to my time here. We had a honky-tonk band called Folk U, which played in lounge once a week, whether it was just us or a crowd of people. And so still playing honky-tonk music now and then and having fun with that. But I thought I would start really with some images of a little bit, really quickly, of what I was doing when I was here, even though I don't normally show this work in a lecture, just because it's here. And this is really where these ideas, you can see what I'm talking about, how it's still connected particularly to this piece. And this was not the first piece I made. The first piece I made was sort of my mantra to Robert Irwin, because he was one of my heroes. So I had to make this big installation piece with, like, you know, light and space and sound, and it wasn't a very good piece, but I spent a lot of time and money on it. And then I got that out of my system, and then I could move on to what I really needed to make. But this was, I think, in many ways, the first piece of a body of work that in many ways I'm still working on. And it's like, it starts as an idea, and everything that exists, all of the conceptual language that exists in this piece, I feel is still present in the work that I'm making now, but it's more like a snowball. It just continues to accumulate as it goes along. But for me, there's still a thread that still goes back to this piece. And with this one, I ordered a lamb from a farm, like actually went and picked it out, and then had it butchered. and then brought it back to my studio, and so those photos are in the studios here, and then stitched it back together Frankenstein style, and then I formed all of the head and all the hooves and the discarded parts out of ground lamb. So it was very much this post-process piece of kind of resurrection parody, and then it exists in this freezer, which is kind of its cryogenic chamber slash sarcophagus. So that piece is still with me. I think it was probably the most important piece for me personally that I made while I was here. And then my second year, it got really weird, and I started making work out of shit and beer and high heels and hot rods and stilettos, and it got kind of weird. And so this last piece here is excrement embedded into the heels of a pair of Prada shoes, which I'll tell you the story at dinner tonight if you have the stomach for it. And so then by the end, or the second half of my second year, I started making this piece, which was my degree show piece, and it was this form that I customized, a taxidermy form, and covered with these ceramic lambs. So you can see here the, let's see, all the little ceramic lambs here, which I learned how to slip cast thanks to some of my friends in the ceramics department at the time. And I was also doing an elective with Tony Hepburn for my whole second year, so that was really influential. And so I broke these lambs I made hundreds of them, the same lamb, and then formed the larger sheep out of the pieces. But they were made from the corresponding parts, and then it was birthing this little lamb with the halo. So that was where I finished, and then after school, I went through the typical transition period of a year of what the hell am I doing and how do I move on to the next step, and trying to figure out how to make work again. And so maybe within a year I dove into this piece, and using the same molds, I made this piece. Kind of was conceived while I was making that first piece, and ultimately I think it was much better because it got at some of the ideas I was trying to achieve, I think, more efficiently. And the process was better as well. But it was the larger form is constructed to mimic the smaller form. And with the first one, I was trying to get at this connection of Dolly, which was the first, and with the meat lamb, which was, of course, the first ever known or recorded animal to ever be cloned. And I thought that was an interesting comparison to this symbolic and religious nature of the lamb, that man makes a lamb. And so I wanted to get at that alternate birth. So where the first one was birthing through the birth canal, this one has 9 little lambs radiating out of its body, and it's a little bit more freakish with the larger parts of lambs. There's hundreds of lambs make up the larger lamb, and again made out of its corresponding parts. So you can see the mouth is made of all mouths, and the ears and even the eyes are made of all little eyes. So this was, it took over a year to make, on and off, because I was a new teacher at the time, so I was just trying to work on this when I could, but it helped really for me break the ice to get back into working again, which was really important for me. Then, I put it in storage, showed it a few times, put it in storage, but then they put together this show in San Diego, at the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, and which was just a very influential museum for me, so I was really happy to be included in this show. And even though it was an older piece, they just really felt like it would do well in this entryway here. So they built these plinths for them, and put that and this other piece that I made down here after that, which was a bomb with animated angel wings made out of the same form. So I've kind of worked through some, I don't really call them series, but I keep working through some of the similar ideas. So I'm really still thinking about animals here. And this is a simple Burrow brand sawhorse, which you see stacks of them at Home Depot, and covered with about 200 pounds of drywall screws. And it stands, it self-balances. So my theory in making this piece was that if you hold a chair on its feet, and you find its center of gravity, or hold up the sawhorse and try to find that center of gravity, if I just flattened the feet, it would balance. So hopefully if I covered it in drywall screws, it would be the same weight, evenly distributed, and it would still balance. And so it was a little trickier than that, but because it fell apart many times, and there are more screws than there is wood in many cases, so it just kind of blows apart, and it was pretty challenging to make. But this was the first drywall screw piece I made, and I made several. But so it's rearing up like this black stallion, but I like the idea that, you know, the drywall screw and the sawhorse are just sort of ubiquitous for home improvement and Home Depot and that culture. So it's a very simple connection of two materials, but adding this life to it. So it really is still connected to this quasi-resurrection, which I was doing with some of the other pieces, and it's rearing up like a stallion. There's a close-up there. It weighs about 200 pounds. And it falls apart every time I transport it, and I have to rebuild it for a couple hours. And so with that same idea in mind, continued to a few other pieces of with drywall screws. So with this one, this video is supposed to go. Is that going? Oh no, my video. Yeah, I'm trying. It's not working. Oh well. So this, as you can see from on the lower left there, I took a Wilson football, which is, you can actually see the Wilson logo in there, but it's a rubber football, so it's not like the pigskin. It's just a simple rubber football, and I pierced holes in it with a soldering iron so it would seal the holes, and then loaded it with drywall screws. And then it actually breathes and moves around, and so it's you know, really taking something and killing it by piercing it 1,000 times. But what was happening with some of these pieces is I started to become interested in the way the method of destruction was really seamless with the method of resurrection. Like the two became indistinguishable as I was going along. So it's pushing it through that destruction to the point of becoming this new life. And this was also in, even though it was an older piece, the curator loved it and put it in the California Biennial, and it was really nice. It just would wander around the floor and sometimes unplug itself, and the cart would fall behind it. And you couldn't really see it, but over a whole day, you know, it would go like 6 feet or something, and it would wander around as it would move. I'm sorry I can't get that video going for you. So this, with the same, I think with the same mindset, I was thinking about this piece. This isn't the piece, but I was in graphic design for 6 years full-time before I came here as a sculpture student, and was putting myself through school here by doing a lot of freelance design for the firm I was still working for in San Diego, spending a lot of time retouching, and this whole resurrection parody which was beginning to develop. By the time I was leaving, I was really thinking about image and the two-dimensional quality of image and how it becomes this dead representation of reality. But also some of the projects I was working on as a designer with, you know, did a campaign for Miller High Life where, you know, airbrushing some of these sexy models and doing this, you know, campaigns that I was just, you know, making a buck. And so I was looking at that and thinking a lot about that. And then, so, you know, how do you take something from its dead state and then push it back through to add some sort of life to it again, similar to the lamb? So with that same mindset. But I was thinking about this. I remember very specifically before I left here, but it took me a couple years before I actually dove into it. So I thought I would take the image, and now digital images, of course, are really the language more so than the printed image, and even the printed image goes through some digital phase at some point. So kind of going back to what I was seeing as the visual DNA of an image. Meaning, you know, you can break it down to binary code and RGB values, but if you look at the smallest visual component to an image, really it's a pixel. And then this kind of flesh, this pixelized flesh, which is also, you know, censorship when you see images on the news where they kind of blur out and pixelate. I was thinking about that. So starting from that point of view, I attempted to extrude them back into space and make that two-dimensional pixel, which I decided to make 1 inch by 1 inch, so it's like 1 DPI, and then cast these pixels into a translucent resin. So I made this aluminum pattern, milled aluminum pattern, pulled some silicone molds like ice cube trays, and then I could get a 5-sided form, and then had to mill them down in order to make a perfect 6-sided form. And then I started building with these, and I made a lot of different pieces. This was the first installation where I made 5 by 5 by 5 compositions with these translucent flesh-colored cubes. So I cast as many different flesh colors as I could get with the pigment that I had. And some of them have glitter in them. So I was thinking about not just natural flesh, but video game flesh and Barbie flesh and some of the more commodified colors of flesh. Now the piece, actually, I still love this piece. I couldn't sell it because it started falling apart after I made it. And the urethane resin, as I found out, has this oily residue that it casts off after, and I didn't know that. I was in a rush to get it done. So the piece started falling apart. So I never felt like I could sell it because I didn't want to chase it down and have to repair it over and over again. So, but it worked out well because it's in a beautiful collection right now. Is a friend of mine who was an amazing architect, Kevin DeFreitas. He was actually AIA Young Architect of the Year, and his beautiful home that he designed, it's in his house, and I traded it for a pile of mid-century furniture, which was great. And then I've had to go over there and repair it once in a while and hang out with him, so that works out pretty well. But I have a stock of these cubes, and I would like to go back and make some more. Some of them have cavities, some of them are protuberances. But looking at these clusters, these small compositions, was really the more interesting final outcome for me with this piece. There's some more with some of the glitter. So still thinking about image, and particularly the mass culture, celebrity image and pop culture image, and thinking about how that affects us all as individuals. I'm sure in hindsight, probably having a daughter around this time was part of it. Thinking about my own involvement with airbrushing images like this for design projects, and having a daughter and thinking about some of these bigger issues about the sexuality in media culture, particularly, but really more the commodification of the images, particularly of women's bodies, was something I was thinking about a lot. So, but also with an interest in that I came here with, which was, as many artists have been influenced by taxidermy, particularly the Museum of Natural History and those dioramas, which I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up going to see those, and so many artists have been influenced by those. My dad was also a taxidermist before I was born, and so he was doing it as a hobby when I was a kid. So I was thinking about all those things, and I've always loved bug collections. So this was one of the first pieces I did where I took only the skin, isolated only the skin from each of these images, and with a collection of craft punches. So I had these kitschy craft punches around the studio for a while, started collecting them, but I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with them. And then one summer it turned into this. And this was the second one. The first one's terrible, but this one's still pretty crude compared to where the whole series went. But so lifting them, skinning an image in much the same way that you would skin an animal, and then going around the eyes and the text and everything, and just pulling out the skin, disassembling it, breaking it into parts, and then putting it back together again, which you can see it's kind of this lineage from that lamb piece, which I'm still holding on to. This was in 2007, 2008, I really started making this work. And so you can see they're in these bug collection type boxes, like museum studies. Then I wanted to start, I wasn't happy with the scale of these pieces, so I wanted to do something bigger. And driving around any city, you see these BB ads. And it was interesting because I know one of the designers that was on this campaign for a while, because the ad agency that did this campaign for years, they don't anymore, was in San Diego. And so there was a local connection there. But I also I didn't want to take an image and blow it up. I wanted to find something that already existed in that scale, that we already understand and we're used to seeing it in that scale. And everybody has seen this campaign. They've essentially had the same campaign for years. It's pretty simple. So I found the image on the left, and I started acquiring some of these BB posters on eBay, fresh off the street, I'm imagining. And so the first one I did was this one. And I was looking for images where the logo interacted with the skin in particular, and which was part of what I was interested in some of the earlier pieces was that interaction of text and the skin. So this one she's actually 1-to-1 scale. So, and that's what I really liked about this image is it was perfect life scale. So these are, the final panels are 4x6 foot. And so there's a little bit more, I felt, of a visceral sensation because of the connection to the human scale. And at this point, I had really amassed a collection of over 300 different craft punches. And I was purposefully and intentionally limiting myself to whatever I could find in the craft punch realm. So I quickly exhausted Michael's, and that got me about 50 different craft punches. And then I was on all over these scrapbooking websites and just about everywhere I could find every craft punch I could find at the time. Spent a whole bunch of money because those things are really expensive. And then I had digital line art, vector art of all of these. So I had a digital catalog, and I could really map it out like a puzzle, but then go in and I'd have to, dissect the image with these craft punches. So there's a detail there. The largest one is about 3 inches in diameter, and the smallest one is actually only barely bigger than the head of a pin. So it really does, there's some of them you can see in there, it's just a dot. So, yeah.
Do you use the actual poster to punch, or do you reproduce it?
I reproduce it, yeah. And at first, actually, the first one, I didn't tell you the title, the W magazine cover. All of the titles come directly off the cover. So that one was called Posh and Beck's. With Posh and Beck's, I used the actual cover, and it got too difficult, and it was too crude. The way that I could dissect it. So I had worked out a process where I could map it out digitally and then make the prints and then make the cuts. But they're printed to the exact same scale. In fact, you can see a pretty heavy moire on there. You can see the print pattern because they're so big that they're printed, I think it's like a 50 line screen or something. It's like really loose printing. So because they're meant to be seen at a distance. So I tried to just go in and as efficiently as possible extract all of the skin from the image. And then I was purposefully looking at that logo. It's just an iconic logo that you can really recognize the logo in negative space. And these are titled, there's a little detail of the hands there, so going around the fingernails and everything as efficiently as possible. And the titles are, this one is titled Misha Barton for BB, which comes right out of the ad campaign. And I thought that kind of captured the sacrificial nature of model to brand. And it comes directly from the campaign, Misha Barton for BB. There's some of the digital process as I go in and map it out. There's a shot of my studio with my collection. I'm a little bit organized. And so they're all organized by size. And there's one over here I'm not showing in the lecture, but I did the Time magazine Obama Person of the Year. I did that one as well, but it was the Shepard Fairey portrait. So it was like my graphics over the Shepard Fairey graphics, which was, it was an interesting piece, I thought, but most people didn't really care for it. So, so there's the title. Actually, it comes directly from the ad campaign. Then there's a shot. This was 2008, a solo show I did with my gallery, Luis de Jesus, and the one on the right is Rebecca Romaine for BB. So it was another BB poster that I did. Then some smaller ones. These were all in the same show. In this one, I think it might be the designer in me, but I really loved how the descender went down over her forehead. So I'm still a little bit of a type nerd. So that was really what drew me to this one. So this one's titled Brittany's Mental Illness. And with the same process of extracting only the flesh and leaving everything else and they become these bug collection museum studies. You can see I was giving a little more negative space on these, which I think was a little bit more effective. There's a couple details there. Whatever fits. Twin bliss, of course. This, at the time, this particular photo shoot set a record for the most money ever paid for a celebrity photo shoot, which I think has been beaten since then. I like that head. That's actually kind of my favorite moment in that whole piece. Then this piece, it got really intense and very time consuming. I have a tendency to do this to myself, to be overly ambitious and then pay the price for a couple months while I finish the piece. And by the end, I hate it and it's torturous, and as many of you probably experienced that. But this is 4 foot by 4 foot to give you an idea of the scale. It's obviously a rose window reference. It was kind of a conglomeration of several that I looked at and then designed my own, but it was based on a few different ones. But they are all hearts, and with all the craft punches I have, I think, 17 different sizes of hearts, from about 3 inches down to about the size of the head of a pin. Kind of going in, just to give you an idea of the detail, they're all mouth corners from fashion images, so they're all lips. And then there's a close-up of the center. So you can see it's really barely bigger than the head of a pin, but each one is a mouth, and all organized by color. And so I could really try to get some color blends. But the craft punches for me were, I was really drawn to the fact that, I looked at maybe making some custom punches or making some custom dies, but I quickly came back to the stock craft punch, because I thought it was, those are used for kind of creating a kind of a special memory or decorating things. And there is already a connection between the craft punch and the image. People use them for scrapbooking and with their photos. So I liked the idea of simply accepting what existed, because, and one of the ideas that continues through my work is looking at ways in which we are pre-programmed to consume imagery and the things that we buy, and some of the false notions of individuality that we all, we have ways of expressing ourselves, but whether it's through what we wear or the clothes that we choose. But when you really get down to it, you realize that there's more similarities, and most of those choices have been made for us. And maybe we have a choice of like 3 or 4 things, but you pick one of those things, but those choices have been made, and we all kind of fit within the same realm. We're not all that different at the end of the day. So that's why I liked, rather than making my own custom shapes, I liked just accepting the shapes that were there, and as a pre-prescribed method of image consumption, which is really kind of questioning my own, how much am I affected by the imagery that's around me all the time, and trying to get into that and experiment with that a little more and really figure that out. And so that was the big reason for the craft punches with this series. And I just love kitsch. I've always been drawn to kitsch. There's a couple more details of this piece. The heart fit really nicely into the Gothic rose window pattern. So the next one in the process here, this takes that interest of the interaction of the logo to the skin, to the model's skin, and I really wanted to focus on that with this piece. And it's definitely influenced by my experience in the graphic design world and dealing with the psychology of brand and thinking a lot about brand, thinking about creating desire, which is often what graphic designers do. I did a lot of package design for Pepsi and Nike and Qualcomm and Intel were some of the bigger clients that I worked for. So a lot of thinking and planning and being strategic about brand, it absolutely influenced my work for many years, even with the Prada piece and the Miller High Life piece. So with this one, I'm going to show you, I'm going to click through these images really quick to show you a little bit of the process of how I made it. again, using the constraint of these images that already existed, but the logo became the common denominator. So I found all of these Gucci ads, magazine ads, where the logo was going over the skin in some way. And then I isolated just that section of skin that surrounded the logo, and with whatever natural breaks. So you see, I'm trying to use the natural breaks in the image and then isolate that. So you can see I'm going to go through here and then show you how I've just isolated that. So everything is registered according to the logo. Taking out everything but the skin. So the value of the model in this piece is determined by its connection to the brand, which I found interesting. And then that's the final piece. So if you look at it straight on, the logo's legible, but then they're stacked, they're extruded through space. So it's the same idea of the two-dimensional becoming three-dimensional, which in a way is exploiting the two-dimensional nature of the image. It really shows its flatness by bringing it into three-dimensional space. And so you can see from the side view, they're layered with a little bit of space in between each one, so the logo becomes distorted, but it's visible head on. There's a couple more details there. And these were hand cut, which I've gotten away from now, but these were actually hand cut. But it's leading. This piece definitely led to the work that I'm making right now, but I took a couple breaks in between. So massive shift here. Might be a good time for intermission. I was making all that work, and this institution in San Diego, it's in La Jolla, it's the Athenaeum Music and Arts Library in La Jolla. It was the original library in La Jolla. It's a beautiful old historic building. They have a great contemporary gallery, and the director there is fantastic. And she became really interested in that work that I was doing with fashion imagery. And they approached me interested in doing a solo show. It was a big gallery. And so I thought it was great, but I just didn't want to make that work anymore. I was already thinking about other things. And so I put it off I was very busy, and I put it off for a long period of time and kind of procrastinated for almost a year until it finally came down to it where they said, no, we want to meet, let's get together. I didn't want to say no, but I also didn't want to say yes because I didn't want to make a whole new body of work. They wanted me to make a whole new body of that Craft Punch work, and I was just thinking about other things. So, whoops, got a loose connection here. There we go. So anyway, I love the way this worked out because it was, I'd been thinking about a piece for a while, and as you all know, sometimes you have these seeds of ideas that just exist and you don't know what to do with them for a couple of years. Well, I had one of those ideas where I was jamming these books into a cheap IKEA bookshelf, and almost to the point where it was going to blow apart, but I jammed that last book into it, in between the walls of the shelf. And I noticed that it popped up in the center. It was like it was self-supported, which I thought was really interesting. So, because then all of a sudden the books become useless because you can't even pull them out, and it just self-supports. So they become just an object to look at, and they're no longer functional. So that was really all I thought about. And then I had this idea of, well, what if I just made these expanses of books? And it's a library. I thought, that's great. They're probably going to love that. So I'm totally serious. On my way to the meeting, which is about a 20-minute drive, I didn't even have a drawing. And so I decided I was going to pitch that piece to them. And so we got into the gallery, and it was completely unrehearsed. And so what I lacked in planning, I just made up with a lot of gesticulation and arm waving, and it's going to be like this and that. And Erica she flipped out over it. She loved it. And when I had a panic attack on the way home, because then I realized that I actually had to do it. And so then Stephanie, the co-curator, said at some point in the conversation, I don't think I've actually told her this either. She said at some point in the conversation, well, you'll probably have to do some type of keystone for that, right? And I just said, yeah, keystone. And then I had never thought of that, but of course thought of that later because I had no idea. You just press a bunch of books together and well, a lot of weird things happen when you start pressing books together. So the following summer, I went about experimenting, which was like this backyard physics engineering project filled with trial and error with many book explosions, and had to, but it was cool. It was over a year where they allowed me to come to their, every couple months they would have a book sale of books that were donated to the Athenaeum, and they would have a book sale. And at the end of the book sale, they would let me come and take all the books. So I had like 5 truckloads of books over the next year that I brought home, and then had all this raw material. And then over the summer, I started experimenting. And so there's some of the really early tests. I was naive enough to think that, you know, we could just press these things together. So I got some ratchet straps from my truck and then realized that they just blow apart and they just want to go sideways and all over the place. And it became kind of crazy. So I had at least 5 book explosions, and I was chasing it down all summer long, which was very stressful. But in hindsight, it was actually really fun because I went from this very meticulous, you know, magnifying glass and this meticulous process to doing this, which was kind of the break that I needed. So you'll see on the left there is the first successful attempt, which I was only able to do about a 4-foot span at that point. And then some of the things that really made it work were the keystoning, which that stuck in my head, and I came back later. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. But I had to continue. I upgraded the tensioning hardware 4 times in the process. I started out with really simple ratchet straps, and by the end, you can see those are 1,000-pound come-alongs, and I had to have custom straps made by a local sailmaker, and chains, and there's 2. So there's 1 on the other side, and there's 2 on the other side. So total in the row, there's over 4,000 pounds of pressure because those come-alongs are completely maxed out. And the maroon book you see there that's just getting destroyed is a Nora Roberts novel. So I thought that was pretty cool. She's getting just completely destroyed, but you can see the amount of pressure that these were under. So it was quite literally a pretty dangerous piece. But if you look at the one in the center down there, you'll see on the pressure plate against the wall, there's a wedge. It's like a reverse keystone that actually pushes the bottoms of the books together. I don't know if you can barely see that, but you'll see it more. There's a little bit of the process here, pulling each row to each side, and the large span, I was only able to test a 30-foot span, but the gallery is 40 feet, so I was hoping that I could still do a 40-foot span. And there's the final installation, which it was important to me conceptually that the piece is titled John Henry, and it was important to me that I didn't know if I was going to be able to do it or not, or I didn't know what it would look like, but I knew that whatever it looked like was just going to be the piece. So it was kind of like, okay, I've got the idea, and I don't know what the final version is going to be, but that's going to be what the piece is about. So I had ideas that I was going to have to put cables like pulling to the wall. It required the horizontal bracing, which you can see is just some basic steel angle iron, and the clamps, because as soon as you put them under pressure, it just starts becoming a snake. It just wants to go sideways. And then so that controls the sideways pressure. But then you can see above each of the sawhorses, there's a wedge, which is an upside down keystone. So it pushes between each sawhorse support is a 10-foot span. So essentially it's a flat arch. And so it pushes the bottoms of the books together, and then you see in the center of the span there's shims which push the tops of the books apart. But so it's like a flat arch just that happens within the pressure of the books. And the sawhorses it is what you see. So they had to rope this off for safety reasons, because you could kick the bottom of that sawhorse and the whole thing would come crashing down. So it was quite literally a dangerous piece. And it was pretty worrisome because it's a library and there's like kids that come through, and I was having some almost a nervous breakdown, thinking like one night about like there's a kid that's going to go through and he's going to like yank on the thing and the whole thing's going to collapse and somebody's going to die, and I really didn't want to do that. So so the large span is 40 feet, and the small one, they intersect And the small one is like 25, I think, somewhere around there. There's another view of it there. And you can go up and you can actually rotate. The double sawhorses you can rotate because they're kind of on that center of gravity, and you can actually spin them. So this was another small piece that I included in that show, which I like. And they ended up buying this piece, which they loved. This is, you know, the Frankenstein thing is still part of what I do. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is one of my favorite books, but it's this particular copy. This is a 1932 edition that was illustrated with scenes from the movie with Boris Karloff, so which really is barely even based on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, so it's kind of an interesting book. So cloak and dagger style, I had a die made and punched out the center and put the hot glue gun in there, which is kind of going back to my interest in kitsch. This was the installation at Luis de Jesus, Los Angeles. So I thought it gained some things and lost some things. The large span was 45 feet, so again, another test of how long I could go. And when this piece was done, I was pretty happy because it was pretty stressful. This happened at a time when my wife was on bed rest with she had been on bed rest for a month with our second son. And I'm up in LA making this thing. You know, we had planned it months in advance. I didn't know she was going to be on bed rest, of course. So I'm looking at my phone. She could give birth at any second. And I'm up screwing around with this piece, trying to make this thing work. My assistant took my truck out to her cousin's house. Like, we were up there for 3 days. She gets in a 5-car wreck on our way back and totals my truck. It was an extremely stressful time. The opening was just a blur, and when this thing was all done, I was happy it was over. But it didn't come crashing down. But ironically, we had a pretty big earthquake in San Diego in 2010, and LA felt it too. And no joke, it came down over Easter weekend. If anybody's from that area, you remember that a couple years ago. There was a pretty big earthquake around Easter. I took it down at the Athenaeum. The earthquake happened on the next day, and I put it up in LA the following day. So it was like I got so lucky because it would have come down. There's no doubt it would have come down. So that John Henry, which, you know, of course, is the legend of, like, you know, the Industrial Revolution legend of the human effort to, you know, he beats the steam drill but then he dies. So it's like winning the battle but losing the war. And I really like that struggle. The title came later because it was indicative of my struggle with this piece, of just fighting it all summer long to try to make this thing work and ultimately conquering it. But you know, feeling kind of defeated at the end as well. So John Henry seemed like the right title. So I had a studio visit the same morning that my assistant wrecked my truck. I got a call from Orange County Museum of Art interested in doing a studio visit because they were looking at people for the California Biennial. And so she went down, she saw John Henry in LA, and then she came down to my studio. And I don't think I ever would have gone back to making ceramic lambs again. It's not that I was done with it. It's just that, you know, I could do several more ceramic lamb pieces. I have plenty of ideas, but when you have limited time, you sort of have to choose which direction you're going to go in. I can't do it all, so I usually choose the newest ideas, the ideas that excite me the most. But she was really interested in the lamb work. That's just what she loved. And so she came down to the studio, and I showed her all kinds of stuff. But she just said, "What about the lambs?" And she came back to me later. She just loved this work. So I had this idea in some form or another on the back burner and proposed this piece to her, and she loved it. And so, you know, I may not have made it if it weren't for that particular show, but I made it. And it's called Flock, and it's a flock of 40 lambs, which there is some significance to 40, mainly because 40 was the max number of lambs I could power on one circuit. Otherwise, I'd trip the breaker if I added one more lamb. There's 10 transformers, which all draw on the 20 amp circuit, And although I kept it to 15 in case it ever had to go to a 15 amp circuit. And so that was the absolute max. I couldn't add another transformer. It had to be a dedicated circuit. So that determined the number 40. But there's also like, there's multiple biblical references to the number 40 throughout the Old Testament. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But I have to admit, I kind of backed into that. I just thought it was kind of interesting. I didn't intend that. There's a close-up there. Same forms, although I had worn out those forms by casting hundreds of times in the same forms. So I went back to the same manufacturer and got some new molds made of that same lamb, and then set out to mass produce these lambs again. And I learned a lot about electrical with this piece. It was a lot of trial and error. And building the cart, originally the cart was going to be, or the sort of the mother ship was going to be another big blob with broken pieces. But as I started building the infrastructure of all the circuits and everything, I found that was much more interesting. So that became the life support system for the flock. This was the second show with that piece, which was at UNLV in Las Vegas, and they had a nice mezzanine where I could get an aerial shot of the piece. So a little bit of the process there of going back to, once again, creating an army of these ceramic lambs, and then the wiring and the whole process there. So that was kind of an episode. Back to that again. Then this year, being on sabbatical, I had just a backlog of ideas, some things that I really wanted to pursue, some different directions in a lot of work that I wanted to get into. And so the sabbatical came at just the right time. I'm about halfway done now. I'm on a full year, which is just tremendous. It's been wonderful just to go into the studio every day, and just been working my butt off. And so, but I've also been reading, just my latest fascination, aside from the banjo, is the books on astrophysics. And so I, maybe like you, maybe not, I was always an art kid when I was younger. So I was never good at math. It's sort of the cliche, which I've come to think that was probably just bad teaching, because I love math. I'm just not very good at it. And I don't know if I get kind of that anxiety when I see math problems that I don't understand. I still get sort of anxious like I did when I was in 5th grade. And so, but I love math, and I'm interested in math and science, and the work is often informed by that. So I've gotten into these books, by like Brian Greene, String Theory, and Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of my favorite authors. Stephen Hawking, actually, Brief History of Time, which is an older book, which is just an amazing book, which gives a lot of just wonderful explanations, really for the novice like myself, of theory of relativity, and what does that mean? What are the implications of theory of relativity and how that really changed the world? And that's just been fascinating to me. I can't get enough of these books. So this piece is called Superstar Cluster, and I've been looking at these images of like Hubble Space Telescope images, and that's where I'm saying I don't feel like I've lost anything conceptually. I'm still dealing with some of the same ideas, but it just sort of keeps snowballing, and it keeps adding things that may or may not be apparent to other people, but that's really where I'm coming from with this, and that's what I'm thinking about. So I was looking at like nebula and different gas clouds and things of that nature. But also, but still thinking about the body and all of the commodification of the body in media culture. And so these are, instead of the craft punches, I'm taking images. These are now all found through Google image search, and they're all celebrity and fashion images, where I'm taking out, isolating the skin, but particular limbs, and wherever possible, I'm using the image where the natural breaks in the image, just like in the Gucci piece, like wherever it breaks, where there's an article of clothing or a strap or a piece of jewelry or something like that, that's where I try to break it. And then they're all outlined in Illustrator, and then I start to build this layout and fit them together into this tapestry of skin. So everything else is removed, and you'll see even fingernails, there's a little toenail there that's removed. A couple details of that piece. This was the first one I did. This was this summer. So the 3 pieces I'm showing you now are the last pieces and the most recent pieces. I wanted to do, originally I was going to hand cut these, and then that was not a good idea. So I decided to try laser cutting, and I'm really jealous of all the laser cutting I'm seeing around here because I don't have one, and it's really expensive, and so you guys are really lucky to have that. But I had never really, I'd done some water jet cutting in steel, but I'd never done laser cutting before. So made all these vector files, but then the trick has been to register the laser cut to a digital print with barely a 64th of an inch image bleed. And so, you know, there's a little bit of distortion that happens in the print process. So it's been really challenging. So I took a lot of time this summer to figure that out. I think I've got it pretty well figured out now, but this piece was smaller. It's about this big. It's, you know, maybe 2 feet square, 2.5 feet square. And there's a detail there. Some of these little pieces you can see in relationship to the scale of the pinhead that they're actually really, really small. And you can see some of the little nail holes. So everything's still removed except for the skin. And none of them touch. So there's a nice tension that's created in the piece because nothing touches. They're all just suspended with just a little bit of negative space. You can see the dimensional quality to it there. So then that was the test, and then this was the first large one that I've created, which this one is titled Flat Earth, Young Earth. And it's, so there's a nice nucleus to the center. And it's the same as the other one, where it's creating this flat two-dimensional plane, but it's 4 foot by 4 foot. So it's compared to that one, it's quite large, and it has a you can see the nucleus there, and the pieces get much smaller. Again, if you can kind of tell with the size of the head of a pin, there's kind of an extreme detail, which this detail is actually far better than you can see with your own eye. Like I'm seeing things in there that I can't see when I look at the piece. And they just kind of, the negative space just holds everything together. There's a nice tension. But what I was after with this one, originally I was imagining these burst patterns, these explosions, and I was thinking about the Big Bang and 13.7 billion years and all of these things. But then I was more interested in the compression. So you see the original title of this piece actually was, and I'm kind of gravitating between both, but it was gravitational radius or Schwarzschild radius. Anybody know that term? Any like closet physicists out there? It's like it's the gravitational radius, or the Schwarzschild radius, is the point of no return, astrophysically speaking, of when you can take particles of matter and compress them. And actually, so if you were to take the Earth, it's one of those statistics that I love, or interesting fact that I love, you could take the Earth and shrink it down. If you took all of the space out of between the atoms, the subatomic particles, and condensed it down to solid matter, it would be the size of a golf ball, but it would weigh the same, and it would have the same gravitational attraction. But then, so that's the Schwarzschild radius, is if you compress it slightly beyond that, it becomes a black hole, where the gravitational force is so great that light can't escape it, which is the definition of a black hole. So that's where my head has been at recently, and I'm thinking about all that stuff. So, but somehow Schwarzschild radius didn't really have that ring to it. So flat Earth, young Earth is what I've been thinking about, and it is a direct tongue-in-cheek reference to two things. For one, this flatness that we're obsessed with, the flatness of image, and not just women's bodies and the commodification of bodies, but through this flat representation of bodies. So it is this obsession we have with flatness. But then the young Earth, of course, which is talking about youth culture, but also like the idea that the Earth is 6,000 years old, which, you know, some very conservative quasi-scientists actually believe. So I'm kind of taking a stab at that. There's a couple more details of that piece. So these are all, I have over, let's see, about 700 different image body parts that are all outlined and that I can manipulate to form the composition. You can see a little bit of the depth there. This was just photographed a few days ago and just sending it off to Miami now. So I'm very curious to see the response to this piece. And using a gradation of the more neutral tones and the black and white images as it gravitates out toward its gravitational radius. So I'm thinking more of compression with this piece, or being sucked into the nucleus more so than an explosion. And then I'm going to end with this piece, which is one that I'm really excited about, which is going in a lot of different directions, and is maybe more, it's a little bit more obvious, the influence of some of these books that I've been reading. Like I'm fully aware that most people wouldn't get the influence with science and astrophysics of some of the other pieces, but it's apparent for me. It's kind of where it's coming from. But this piece is really exciting for me right now. So this is called Omega Man, which I'm thinking of it as Charlton Heston meets Donald Judd. So if you know that movie Omega Man, which is the last man on Earth, it's actually a great movie. So these are timers that are using Nixie tubes, and there's 12 identical timers. Nixie tubes are they were the standard technology for digital displays before segmented LED displays, like on your alarm clock and stuff. These were the standard technology. So this is actually Cold War era. These are Russian surplus. I got them on eBay from Russia in the original. There's a guy that's amassed like cartons of these things. And so if you look from the edge there, there's each one, it's a vacuum tube, and each one has an indexed number 0 through 9. And each one illuminates like a little light filament. It's actually, it's filled with neon gas. So it's not like a light filament, but it looks like that. They glow. So there's a charge that's put through the filament, and each one illuminates. So they're really beautiful. I love the dimensional quality to them. They're very sculptural because as they count, they're indexed and they move in and out through space. And you can see I showed this image because you can see the CCCP on the side there. They're new, but they're all actually Russian surplus. So, but the piece has here's oh, I'm really hoping this video works. Oh, yay, it's working. So this piece is, actually the title is Omega Man, and in parentheses, trillion-second countdown. So what it does is it counts down from 1 trillion seconds to 0. Which is 32,688 years, and which was just kind of blew my mind that, a trillion nowadays doesn't seem like very long, particularly when you think about budget numbers and fiscal cliff and things like that. A trillion, like, oh yeah, a trillion, like that doesn't seem like that much, but a few trillion, but a trillion seconds, 32,688 years. So I was thinking about that. And so 1 trillion seconds ago, the last known Neanderthals were still walking around the plains of Europe and were in sharp decline in favor of Homo sapiens. So 1 trillion seconds ago, we were still dealing with the dawn of civilization, and everything that we know has happened in the last 1 trillion seconds. So this counts down. It's arbitrarily saying that and actually the countdown started July 1st, 2012 at midnight was when the countdown started. I'm sorry I didn't warn you all, but that was the peak of civilization as we know it. And now we are on the downward slope to this doomsday scenario with the Omega Man clock. And so I'm using the Nixie tubes because it really gets that Cold War. It has you've seen these in some of the early NASA counters, the lunar lander had Nixie tubes on it. It was like that 60s Cold War era technology, but it's also completely functional with, it has a GPS receiver, it has a battery backup and a GPS receiver. So it's truly a doomsday clock. It can't go back. So it's programmed, all 12 of them are programmed with the same start time, July 1st at midnight. And then so you could, if you turn it off, the battery backup will keep it going. But then if you kick the battery out, and you could stick in a box for 5 years and then turn it back on, and it will pick up the time from the satellite, and it will pick up exactly where it would have been uninterrupted. So it will continue. So there's no way that you can turn it off or go back. And so really the piece changes continually. I put in the hundredths of a second. You can see a red decimal point there. And so that's actually in the code. When you first turn it on, that decimal point, the LED flashes until it picks up a signal. It can run without a signal with the battery backup, but it tries to pick up a signal, and then the display illuminates and it goes forward. But I wanted to put the hundredths of a second in there because it really gives this sense of urgency, like something's actually happening. These things are flying through. But then you look all the way over on the left side of the digit, and it's just nines, and that's never going to change as long as I'm alive. So it's just projecting myself 32,000 years in the future, which makes me think of being a kid and going to see like the King Tut exhibit, at the Met, which I remember when I was a little kid back in the 80s, in the early 80s, and seeing these objects from art that are, thousands of years old, and that fact that I can still look at it, that I wish I could touch it, and thinking, is there anything that we make that's going to be around that long? I doubt it. I don't think that this thing's going to be around 32,000 years, but maybe it's about impotence in that sense. It's like attempting to project myself in maybe even an existentialist way, trying to project myself 32,000 years in the future, which it's an attempt nonetheless. There are 12 identical, and I have a rule. In fact, we just had a collector that wants to buy 3 of them, and I said no. And it was really fun to say no to that, actually, because they will all go to different collectors. And so I like this idea. All 12 of them are actually going to debut in Miami tomorrow night. So I'm really excited to see how it goes, because I have this vision that if they end up all over the world, they're still synchronized. So I don't see it as an addition of 12 pieces. I see it as one piece with 12 parts, and wherever they go around the world, they're still all related. So this is also, it's the last piece I'm showing you, but I usually don't talk about unfinished work, but I'm so excited right now because I got a call from my actuary today, and we're working on, this has led to obviously my thinking about time, and the relativity of time and things like that, the abstract nature of numbers and all these things that I've been thinking about. But I'm working with an actuary right now to create another timer piece. It's going in a few different directions, where he's developing a model. He's actually really great too. The fact that he's willing to work with me. Normally he's like $250 an hour, but he's working for me for a very small amount because he just really likes the project. But he's a math guy, really smart guy. He's in like the Society of Actuaries. And what they do is risk assessment. They're like math people, they're numbers people. So he's developing a model right now where we can determine my lifespan. So my projected lifespan. So we're developing this questionnaire that, based on exercise habits and family history, everything that a life insurance company would use short of blood tests. But beyond that, we're compiling all the data really exists. It's just developing this model. So then I'm going to create a clock. The first one is going to be on me, and that will be a countdown for my projected estimated time of death, which will count down to that point. So it's the same technology, which I've worked with an engineer to make this piece, but I'm not going to use Nixie tubes. I'm going to use LED segmented displays. But so that's kind of my own personal doomsday clock, which will be this constant reminder that time is running out with the hundredths ticking off just like that. And it has the same GPS signal, so it can't go back. You can't reset it. But we have talked about so if I start exercising more, can we rerun the questionnaire and then maybe maybe tweak the numbers a little bit, which is possible. But what I'm curious, so I'm going to be making this piece in the next couple of months, but what I like about the piece is that it's totally specific to a collector. So I imagine he's creating a model that could be, anybody could do it. So you have to fill out this questionnaire, and you have to be willing to submit to the process of filling everything out with your health information, and then we can determine with some degree of action, with legitimate, we're not making anything up. This is like legitimate math with an expert actuary who's going to develop this number, and he's putting his seal of approval on it, that we're going to develop that number. And then, so any collector, so I'm thinking about it as an open edition. I'll make these things for for anybody, because it's really, everyone is unique because it's based upon your particular life expectancy. But I like that the piece really can't be acquired by anybody but an individual. You know, a museum couldn't buy it because it'd have to be the museum director or the curator or somebody. So it's a very personal piece. And one of the things that I'm interested in is that it's maybe one of the first pieces, maybe the first piece I've ever made that can exist just as comfortably, and somebody could argue this, but I think it exists just as comfortably outside of the realm of art. It doesn't rely upon art for, as most of my work does, to some degree relies upon art and the art context for its meaning. So that's kind of where I'm going, a little bit about where I've been, where I am, and really where the work's going. And I would love to answer some questions if you guys have any.